Ciao, Anastasia. ¿Cómo estás?
Well, how are you?
Good, good. Thanks. Thanks for joining for this Z brief, where we highlight some of the films that people can watch through internationalfilmseries.com. And there's a lot of interesting titles right now. There's something called Space Dogs. I also want to alert people to the fact that we are going to have a free screening made available of Boys State, which was a documentary I saw at Sundance, and it's very good. I might actually do a separate plug for that tomorrow with Jason, but that's going to be a live streamed event on September 24th. You can RSVP for screening that for free on the internationalfilmseries.com website. We've also got something called The Disrupted. We've also got a documentary, Meeting the Beatles. It just came out. It's Meeting the Beatles in India specifically, which should be a lot of fun. And then the one that Anastasia and I are going to be talking about right now, which is Nomad in the Footsteps of Bruce Chatwin. This is one of the latest documentaries by Werner Herzog, who, of course, IFS customers are very well acquainted with. He actually just came out with a new documentary that's even newer that played at the Toronto Film Festival just a few days ago about meteorites. But this one is about Charles Bruce Chatwin, who is a English travel writer, novelist, and journalist who died in 1989 from AIDS. And he was a very good friend of Werner's, and I think in this documentary by Werner Herzog, dedicated to the memory of his friend, there's going to be a lot of traveling, because that's something that both Werner Herzog and Bruce Chatwin are known for. There's one thing that I want to make sure I don't forget to say, which is when Werner Herzog came out, he's come to Boulder 2 or 3 times now, and I remember having dinner with him and someone else, but I remember a story about how one of his most beloved, just prized possessions is a rucksack that was given to him by Chatwin. And one of his very, very close confidants told me that Werner himself had said at one point, I think Werner's been married 3 times, and so I can't remember if it was in regards to his first or second wife, but this guy said basically, if the house had been on fire, Werner said that he would go in there and he would grab this rucksack, and made no mention of his wife at the time. Anyway, that's just a way of saying Werner obviously was very fond of Bruce Chatwin, and this is a very interesting documentary, very visually loaded with lots of shots of exotic landscapes. So Anastasia, tell me what you thought about it. I know that you gave it a look.
Yes. So as I mentioned to Pablo beforehand, is I'm not the biggest Herzog fan, but this did offer very interesting looks at landscapes. I don't think this is without being problematic. I know at one point in the documentary he mentioned that also Chatwick looked at facts but also expounded upon them, and which is interesting but also can be dangerous. And so I thought this provided an interesting framework for the documentary, because there were definitely things that were talked upon and which should be talked about to a general population, but also it should be kind of done carefully. And one thing that came to mind is towards the end of the documentary, Herzog is talking with somebody that had been in production with him after Chatwin's death, and specifically about the rucksack. And Herzog kept mentioning to this person that he was interviewing, he had to keep saying, I'm not the protagonist of this film. We need to keep talking about this in the framework of Chatwin. And that is something that I thought maybe Herzog could have also kept in mind toward himself throughout the rest of the documentary. Because there were times where I thought that there were landscapes that spoke beautifully for themselves, but Herzog talked us through them in his perspective. So it's definitely a film through Herzog's eyes, and if you approach it in that way, I think it's a beautiful film. It shows how important this person was to Herzog. I do have to say that I feel like the moments where we learned the most about Bruce was after Herzog reconciles his death, which I think is true about most types of loss, is you really learn about the person after they've passed. So that's the time, those were the times where I felt like they kind of came together. But it was an interesting documentary that showed a lot about different types of the world that most people have not been exposed to, and Herzog definitely talked about them and exposed them in ways that otherwise we would not have been able to see. So it's definitely a documentary worth checking out. For me personally, it's not without issue.
No, and you know, I think anyone who's familiar with Herzog knows that he very much puts himself in the mix. He's his voice alone has been you know, it adds layers of personality. But also, I remember, I mean, one of the things that Herzog epitomizes is this idea of like the emotional truth versus the literal truth, and that is something that I think most people understand when they go to a Herzog film, is that he's going for the emotional truth of a scene, of a character, of a landscape, of a people, and he doesn't mind adding some elements to make that happen. And the thing that comes to mind when I was a projectionist for Stan Brakhage, and he would talk about this concept of the emotional truth, he would bring up the idea of the, like, if you say you're the father of or the parent of a child, and you take them fishing, and then you know, you come, the child catches a fish, and then you all come back, and the mom says, "Oh, how was the trip?" And the child says, "It was amazing. I caught a fish and it was this big." And you know, really it was, you know, it was this big. But for the kid who caught that fish for the first time, it really was that big. So the question I would have for you, Anastasia, is the child lying when he says that the fish was this big?
I don't think it has to come down to truth or lying, but maybe the perspective of hearing when the kid says it's this big, knowing the difference between it being this big and not. So maybe just making sure you're being cognizant as the receiver of information is important, I would say.
Sure. The key word, though, is emotional truth versus literal truth. So, and I think most people who go into a Herzog film know that he'll do a few things to try to augment the emotionality of a scene. Now, I do want to also mention that you were able to see another one of the films that we have on tap. I wasn't able to catch it yet, but do you want to give a few words to the other movie?
Yes, Sybil, 2019, was a film that was very enjoyable for me to watch. It's very manipulative and kind of a sadistic viewing. Watching it, all of the characters kind of tear each other apart, but it's not a comedy necessarily, but it presents itself in an interesting way where you're invested in these people's lives, and it's not depressing, but it's also not the most uplifting thing. It's kind of pessimistic in its final resolve, but definitely from the moment it started, there's this shot where there are these two characters talking, and there's just this line of food that's passing around them in a circular motion, and it's just so visually captivating that it's interesting. And I think that tone is upheld throughout the film with the editing from ending one scene and entering the next, as there's often a graphic match that the narrative focuses on a psychologist that's dealing with patients in her own life, but from one shot she'll look very put together and present, and in the next shot she will be torn apart visually. Her whole physical atmosphere is not composed. So just the editing, I thought, from scene to scene was very enjoyable, and the narrative was fun to participate in, although again it was more pessimistic than positive, but it was a fun film to watch, quite honestly.
I do want to just jump in because I just realized that one, Sybil, is not yet quite on the lineup, but it will be. It will be soon. I think it's I can't remember if it's next week or the week after that. So, and that's just something I just realized. So, but Sybil is something to look for. And for those of you who are fans of Herzog, or who just would like to see a lot of great exterior, exotic landscapes, nice drone footage, as Alex said in my podcast with him yesterday. That's Herzog's new film documentary, Nomad, in the footsteps of Bruce Chatwin. And there's a lot of other things that we've got there on the website. So don't forget to check out the internationalfilmseries.com website. And Anastasia, thank you so much for joining, as always, under the carport. And you really help make these things a little bit more lively. So we'll do it again next week. And thanks for those who are tuning in or listening or watching. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Ciao.